maybe I missed it, but in the end you say that expectations determine cognitive momentum. How do you know that? Could it be something else too that determines cognitive momentum?
Yeah, so I mean, I know that just because, you know, we have this, I'm not going to bother to show you the picture, but cooperation declines, right? And it starts off at its highest point and then it declines throughout. And it declines in all cases at about the same rate. And so the amount of total cooperation is uniquely determined by where they started. And so where they started is determined by their expectations, by how cooperative they think that group is going to be. You tell me, you have a...
Well, maybe they would want to signal it, and then, so it's not the expectation that determines the beginning, it's the feedback that determines the beginning.
So the feedback definitely determines the decline, but it doesn't. But the feedback doesn't seem to be contingent on anything, on any of the social variables. I agree with you that there could be signaling in the beginning, though. I think that's a perfectly valid hypothesis. And but nonetheless, whatever their first play is determines the outcome.
I see that.
Yeah.
So relating to that point in kind of day-to-day interactions, are there something like appeasements on the part of lower caste individuals towards higher caste individuals, or are they avoidant? Are they assorting? Like, is there some kind of measure that relates to that type of unwillingness to cooperate, or possibility of signaling some kind of, I don't know, intention or way of interacting with different castes?
On the part of who?
For example, lower caste individuals with higher caste individuals who would, I mean, if it depends what they want to be signaling, but I could imagine that they would be trying to signal appeasement, alternately not will, if they're actually acting this way, not unwillingness to get screwed somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think, I really don't think it is signaling, and the reason is because people are involved, in this society there is a lot of cooperation that goes on. So I help you in your fields one day, you help me in my fields the next day. There's a lot of reciprocity that goes on. There are a lot of big public events and public works that take, you know, a large amount of the village to actually do. And that is continuous and it's ongoing and it happens day to day. And so I think it's very easy to draw the connection between these games, which they were tested on and, you know, and explicitly cued in terms of relating it to a cooperative institution. I really think it's they see it as another cooperative institution, and I really think that I think they think of it obviously as a way to make some money, and so the question is how am I going to make that money? So one of the things that we saw in the control variables was the influence of whether or not individuals had heard about the game before they played it. So after the game was done, I asked them a lot of questions, and that was one of them. Have you heard about it before today? And of course, the number of people who had increased as the game went on over time, but also that variable very strongly predicted decrease in contributions. So people said, look, you know, from my own personal experience, you know, playing this game, you don't hold back your money, and then other people will be contributing and you take it. And so that had a very strong effect. And so I think they understand this mechanism. They understand, first of all, the simple point of stinting and benefiting on others' cooperation. And I think they also understand, you know, very clearly what it means to cooperate with someone of high caste status and someone of middle caste status, because they do it every day. And importantly, every day, they are made to work a lot more than anyone else because of that situation. And so as a result, it never pays for them to have a very high amount of sort of cooperative behavior. That's my theory. Dan, and then Kartik.
So, in terms of generalizing these results, it seems to me there's a strength and a weakness. So, this is kind of a special ethnographic situation in the sense that there isn't there is a linear hierarchy in as much as, people can point to relative importance, but they're important disjunctions in that hierarchy in as much as all those folks in the middle they have kind of ambiguous relationships relative to the clean distinction between the top and the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's a strength in as much as I don't think that's an entirely unusual situation. So, for example, if you look at ethnicity in the United States, right, you have, Euro-Americans at the top and African-Americans at the bottom, and then someone like someone descended from East Asian descent is somewhere in the middle, and it's, they have some analogous properties to those middle castes that you have in your situation. At the same time, it's a weakness in as much as, if you want to, your concluding slides that say this is the contribution of hierarchy and this is the contribution of diversity, and you're treating those as if they were abstract properties that should apply with equal validity to any social situation. And they may not, in as much as this sort of, not completely linear arrangement of caste and its relationship with power means that reducing that relationship to, I hear myself, I sound like a cultural anthropologist, but reducing it to hierarchy it is maybe abstracting it a bit too far, because it isn't a pure hierarchy in as much as there's a single variable that accounts for those features of the relationship.
Yeah, and so another way to say, I think what you're saying, and tell me if this is right, is that there are particular relationships between particular castes, and that is really part of what we're looking at here.
Right, so that to the extent that you wanted to draw conclusions from this that you could apply, so suppose that, I don't know, the WHO or, the United Nations, some conservation program, one of these, so some program comes to you and says, this is great work, we want to consult you as an expert on how to enhance cooperation in some ethnically and hierarchically diverse place that is not where you work, right?
Right.
If you take literally those conclusions about the relative contribution of hierarchy and diversity, you may be, grossly mistaken in terms of the predictions that you'd make about someplace else.
Yeah.
Because of the special nature of the sort of, it's not that it's nonlinear, it's that it's non-continuous in the difference between step one and step two.
Yeah, I very much agree, and it even kind of isn't linear either. I completely agree. And if anyone offered me an opportunity like that, I'd have to start from scratch, and do this whole thing again.
Or, you want to know how parallel is that case to the one that you studied,
Yes.
right? So as I suggested, there may be some parallels in the United States that mean that one could have reasonable confidence in a prediction with regard to the new situation based on the old situation.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Karthik.
Two questions
Please.
related to sort of using this to apply to lead to sustainable operation.
Yeah.
Culture.
Yeah.
One of which, are there some communities in this area that are better ethnically or caste integrated than others? And would that attenuate these effects there if they don't perceive the caste differences as strong as they are, people who get education outside, people like that?
Yeah.
The other question, you had the gentleman who was who took care of the irrigation system.
Yes, the
And the problem he had in adjudicating disputes between higher caste individuals.
Yes.
So the public goods game, one great way of solving the free rider problem is instituting punishment.
Yes.
Which is sort of what the police are trying to do, in other words. And if you're trying to locally empower them to punish themselves and police themselves, if you were to play a game with punishment,
Yes.
and you vary caste and hierarchy, how would the low caste individuals use that technology? Would they not use it, knowing that they were playing with high caste individuals? And would the high caste individuals exploit the low ones where they would use the punishment but not cooperate? Wondering how.
In particular, I'd love to have a punisher role, right?
Right.
And
But it's
that-
likely it would be more interesting if all of them could do it.
True.
Because
Yeah.
some of them probably.
Right, that would actually get better data, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I think very clearly the high caste people would
use
feel
it.
free to punish, and the low caste people would not.
Do you think they wouldn't use it?
I think they may punish themselves. They may punish. It's possible that they might punish people of middle caste, but it would be very rare that they actually punished Manadiyar, or in this particular village, Tevar as well.
Because then you're getting at some of the issues of how a government can come in and sort of empower local
That's
people,
true.
where
Thank you.
if they're not gonna use the technologies that you give them, or they're gonna use it in a very destructive way, then, you know.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Thanks for that suggestion. I mean, I would love to come back and do, do a punishment treatment. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And then your other question was?
Just ethnic diversity, how they perceive, how much they perceive caste, does that affect their
Yeah.
effects?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I haven't been able to do it in.
I mean, if you played it here in the
religions.
US 100 years ago,
Yes.
Italian Americans and Irish Americans
Yes.
would not cooperate with each other, and now we probably don't see that anymore. And
Right.
so-
Yeah, but I think the cool part is, so yes, and there are communities, not in this area, are there communities like that? Very much not. But there are, in Tamil Nadu, and I can find them, I know them. I haven't done it there though. But the cool part about these methods is that you can, and then you can really compare.
Because one of the frustrations with that result, that diversity reduces cooperation, it sort of connotes or implies that ethnicity is a fixed thing.
Right.
In some sense.
Exactly.
That can't ever change.
Exactly.
That people always perceive these differences as
I agree.
existing, and it's a
Yeah.
hopeless endeavor to have public goods when diversity.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of like the simplistic sort of outcome of, oh, well, gosh, it's this region is really diverse. Well, we're just going to have to downgrade our expectations about what it's going to be able to achieve, and maybe even our development aid or what have you. But I completely agree. It co-evolves with the game that people play. Yeah. Any other questions, Sarah?
So I was just wondering, kind of related to these points, whether the diversity condition, you use the middle castes.
Yes.
And then the middle caste, you said that there was no clear hierarchy. Now, do you think that the lack of hierarchy there is coming from a slow breakdown of what you would think of as like the ethnic/caste kind of system among these groups? Or do you think it's more the effect that you talked about?
Yeah, I don't think it is. So, all of these castes are imports, right, over the last, for the majority of them, 150 years, and plenty of them in the last 50. And I think that when they come to the village, certainly they'll have expectations about where they fit in, and they will only be allowed to fit in to a certain extent. However, the fact of the matter is, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't see it as a breaking down, unless, of course, the process of breaking down is the migration. Where people are put in new contexts
Or
and.
the lost hierarchy.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I'm not saying I don't see the loss of hierarchy happening. Yeah, I would see it happening because of that migration. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a fairly general methodological question, and maybe as much to the audience as to you. So it strikes me that these games are incredibly enlightening. If you make the transition towards sort of policy, right? So I mean,
Yes.
there are policy implications here having to do with sustainability. So my general question is, are people using these sorts of experimental tools now coming in and starting to try and directly manipulate the way people play the game? So an example might be, you come in and you get somebody of a lower caste to, knowing the results, getting somebody in a lower caste to play in a way that is against cultural expectations, or what you think to be cultural expectations. Is anybody doing that?
I really want to.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to see if we can get people to play the way they play in everyday, life. And then I want to change the game and see if I can get them to have that change the way they play. And then of course it's another step to see, then can we do it for real? But I desperately think that is an exciting way to go with this, because, but I mean, I don't have any direct knowledge of anyone who's done exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Is anyone else? Sorry, David and then Rob.
Could you tell us something about how the castes, how the agricultural system they take part in the agricultural system? I
That's,
mean,
yeah.
So is everybody a landowner? Does everybody participate in the irrigation system? Are people doing wage
Yeah.
labor, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, yeah, okay, so, great, and I should have maybe included some of that, but basically, not everyone is a landowner. The majority of people do own land, but the amount of land they own varies significantly, so.
Even the low caste,
If low caste will own, you know, a tenth of an acre, a quarter of an acre, but often they'll own none. And so, and even people who do own perhaps even an acre, will also work, you know, for other farmers. So a farmer says, okay, I have to have this done. So a very large fraction of the village does agricultural labor. A very large fraction of the village has land. A small fraction doesn't, but there's a very significant skew. And the low castes have, you know, a very, very small portion in comparison to the rest. In terms of how that integrates with the irrigation system, the irrigation network only extends out so far in the village, and because of the size of the pond, it can only support so many people, and it would, you know, take a lot of work to grow it beyond that. And so, a lot of the more recent immigrants have their, you know, fields, you know, further out, and so they are kind of effectively not in that system, so they're not part of the irrigation system.
where's their water coming
For these people, rain-fed
people
only,
around.
rain-fed, that would be it. In certain villages, there are some cases where they can have a pump, and they have a well drilled and they have a pump, but that's a relatively expensive solution for them. So it's pretty rare, and so typically they'll have rain-fed crops, and they just are playing a more risky game.
And the latecomers are more middle caste?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that somebody who's demanding wage labor, or let's take the extreme case, somebody who's all wage labor, isn't gonna have the same participation in the irrigation decisions, not gonna have the same interest, not gonna perceive, I would wonder whether they perceive the institution in the same way as somebody who has a, you know, profit-making relationship with,
Yep.
and has to, you know, partake in these councils and make decisions about who gets the water today and all those kinds of things. So do you see any effect of that in your results?
You know, I can't know. I don't know. I think it's a perfectly valid critique. I do think though that it's so well because everyone depends on agriculture. Even though, you know, a wage laborer may not themselves, you know, be negotiating for when they're going to get their turn for water. They know very much how it works because they're actually dealing with, you know, applying the water to someone else's fields for them. So I don't think the exposure to the system is really ununiform. Dan?
So, kind of connected to Rob's point and also to Jeff's earlier, although just, as far as I know, Jeff, people haven't done, I wouldn't say that I have anything close to a complete command of the literature on this, but people haven't done what you suggest, which is to use the game as a tool to change behavior by explicitly modifying what people do with Confederates or something like that. But on the same theme, so you framed the game as, you know, an irrigation commons problem. The advantage of that is that you know that, well, you can say with reasonable confidence based on, for example, Lee Cronk's work with the Maasai, that when you do that, people import the norms that apply to the institution that you're borrowing the term from, the label from, right? That has less ambiguity than the converse situation, which is when you use neutral language, you're not sure what norms they're importing, right? So that's a strength, but the limitation, of course, is that if you want to draw general conclusions about what is the relationship between hierarchy, diversity, and cooperation, right? It's difficult to do because the conservative statement would be, I can make a claim about, you know, given my population, I'm not, you know, making a mistake of thinking this generalizes, et cetera, but given my population, I can make a claim about the contributions of diversity and hierarchy to cooperation in a situation that it already has established cultural norms surrounding.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. and I mean, ultimately, I don't see any way around the problem other than collecting more data from different systems.
Right, so you have, you do what Lee did, which is, you have an explicitly named and
Right.
neutral framing.
Yes.
And you see what the difference is,
Yes,
right?
absolutely, sure.
I mean, it would be interesting to know whether, for example, it's possible that irrigation looms so large in people's lives that no matter what you call it, they'll act as if it was an irrigation game.
Yep.
It's also possible that the irrigation game is really just representative of a bunch of, you pointed to the justice system and so on.
Yep.
And it's just representative of a bunch of situations that they face, and they have norms that really are overarching, in which case
Yep.
this has been generalized to the neutral framing condition.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But I don't think you can know until you actually do that.
No, I mean, I would suggest that I have ethnographic evidence that is the case.
Mm.
Yeah. But, no, I don't have, yeah. I'd love to do a general framing one as well.
Yeah, and I don't think you should discount the ethnographic evidence, because in some ways, I mean, the person who has confidence in ethnography would say, this is just a roundabout way of, doing ethnography, right? I mean,
Right.
you already knew that, some of that was gonna be true based on, what you told us at the beginning, right? So that's by way of saying, your intuition that this is not limited to this particular institution is something that I think, has some weight to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, thank you. At least I'm gonna try to argue that when it comes to the paper.
Well, I mean, what are you gonna give with Richard? But
No. Yeah,
If I could follow up on Rob's point.
Please.
You talk about the landowners or landowners, but these guys who are far flung out, who are
Yeah.
on the rainfall.
yes.
Do you know who they are, as opposed to not? And see if they operate differently, because
That's a.
they're not involved at all in this.
That would seem like an
action.
obvious piece of data to collect in the game, and I didn't. Yeah, absolutely. The only groups that don't, that are really sort of disconnected from village affairs are Muslims in these villages, and they are they're more often the shop owners. Sometimes they'll own land, but they're more village they're more business focused, and they won't come to the Podukutum meetings. They don't participate in village affairs. They don't participate in a lot of the Hindu festivals and celebrations. And so, and I do know who those people are, and so I could look at that. And for the most part, they're also outside the system. Yeah, but I don't have the data for everyone. Yeah.
So were they counted as middle caste?
They're counted as middle caste because in terms of the interaction with everyone else, that's where they fit in. But it's an interesting one to look at specifically because they may be different for a couple of reasons.
So ironically, the Muslims are the Jews.
Yes. Yes.
What keeps scheduled caste people from converting to Islam in order to opt out of the caste system?
Well, interestingly, the Muslims in this area are prior scheduled caste people. Yeah, and so there are two particular really low castes who are, now they're all Muslims and they're actually doing, quite well. They're doing as well as the average family or better, and so they have. And they don't happen to be in this particular area though. They're low castes from somewhere else who have come, and so I think it helps. You can't just switch and stay where you are. That doesn't work. You have to change your identity and move and break all those ties because otherwise there's no.
So it doesn't work because even though you converted, people still treat you like.
Right. We know who you are. Yeah. Yeah.
Their mom was.
Their essence. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Christine.
So are people aware? I think the fact that you collected this in the surveys, I think people are aware of the fact that the history of the lineage of the castes in terms of migrating into the area. So do you think that with the middle caste, the conflated variable there is a kind of, perhaps, I don't know how aware they are of this, but, or feel this way, like a joint history of recent immigration into this area as opposed to the fact that they don't have between caste hierarchical differences? Is that possibly contributing to kind of instead of ethnic diversity per se, like this recent common history to the decreased.
In that
To the increased
they're all new
population.
incomers.
Something like that, yeah.
I don't know that that works anywhere, though, does it? Can you point to a case where that's true?
Where out groups kind of combine forces.
Yeah, I
as
mean, I don't think that
coalitions.
the Vietnamese and the El Salvadorians in Orange County say, oh, we're both newbies, so we have a common interest. You know.
Latin Americans do, I think. They created a new kind of identity in the U.S., I think, of that sort.
How much
There
of that
is
is because
tension.
the
There is tension
locals
between them.
give them all, treat them all
Right.
as if they were one ethnicity.
Right,
They're all
exactly,
Mexican.
exactly. No, it has to be in contrast to some other, like, established institutions or groups that treat them that way. And there is obviously, because it's hierarchical in nature, so there could be tension within the.
So that's
I don't know.
it's a great question, and so my first reaction was exactly like Dan's was, you know, look, my experience of these communities is that each one has its own very crisp boundaries. In fact, one of the things I didn't tell you is really interesting ethnographically is that almost the entire village justice system is recapitulated on the small level within every single caste, and so you know, issues will try to be handled within the caste, within the village, before it goes to, you know. So anyway, my first answer was, you know, no, I don't think so. But then it made me think that maybe there's another possibility, which is that, like, you know, Karthik was saying, people come in and we know they're neither here nor there, and so we create this other space for you. It's sort of like the hierarchical situation, the caste system, in the way it exists within these villages, is sort of forcing people to fit in this middle place, perhaps. And maybe that creates somewhat of a common identity. I mean, the way that I define it here, even though I maybe wasn't explicit about it, is that the middle caste group is just everybody that's left over, you know, when you take out high and low. And so I don't really see any commonality. Yeah.
Could you tell us something about the tribal people that were there before, and were they completely extirpated, or is it just the?
They're still there, and in some cases they never live in the villages. In some cases they live on the peripheries of the village areas, but in most cases they live significantly distant. They are no longer part of any village organization type stuff, and furthermore, sometimes they'll have small amounts of land here and there, but they'll always be on rain-fed land, and they still make more use of natural forest products and stuff.
And they were doing some kind of horticulture before?
They were.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Roots and tubers. Yeah.
Again, we said that data. What's the size of the population?
I'm sorry, I didn't give it. No. So in this village where I did the games,
Yes.
the population is 5,000. It's a large village,
Oh.
and then and it's the biggest example of a whole around 20 villages, which vary in size from around 300 to 5,000, the largest. And I picked this one because it was large, had a big population I could keep sampling from, and it had 13 different castes, so I had a lot to work with.
So people don't know everybody.
It's pretty. I think people do pretty much know everybody. It's very close to people knowing everybody, because people don't get a lot of opportunity to get out of the villages, and so
Okay.
5,000 is a big village, but yeah, people know who you are.
Okay. I would like to come back to the beginning of your talk about the notion of cultural sustainability. How do you define that, and if the implications of the game, of your experiment, would change anything in your definition of cultural sustainability?
Sure. So first, I guess I have at least two definitions of cultural sustainability, and I was kind of gently touching on it in the beginning. First, there's the question of what is culturally stable, all by itself, with no regard to the environment. And then there's the question of what are the links between environmental resource availability, persistence, quality, and the like, and how stable cultures are. and then of course the feedback links as well. And so I'm more interested. Well, to me, it's all part of the same problem, and that is, what are the conditions, both cultural and ecological, under which a long-lasting, persistent society can come about, and moreover, it can not just come about, but also persist beyond resource limitations in a sense. So, and now you'd like to know how does my game influence that question? I was kind of trying to dodge that question. So, I mean, I think, first of all, I mean, even including the discussions about how generalizable this is, I think that my gut reaction is that competitive environments inherently create, a competition for resources, and which, so competitive social environments, so that would, I think, include environments where I don't identify with my neighbor. And so ethnic diversity in the first cut, I think, should create this a competition for resources. And the competition itself is not necessarily efficient in terms of ecological efficiency, right? It would, if I don't care about how they're using, if I don't care about their well-being, in fact, I only care about my own, but I know that they're also consuming, I may be more incentive, I may be incentivized to take more than I use at any given point, or to try to monopolize more, which can lead to a race to the bottom or similar things. So I think that that's real. So that's the first thing. And secondly, I think that hierarchy has a stronger influence. In my experience, particularly ethnographically here, the low caste people have no reason to cooperate in the course of their daily life. They're just put upon in every way, and so I see the social boundaries as well as the power relationships as both being having negative environmental consequences. And one of the ways you see that, particularly in India and in these villages as well, here is with the concept of public space. Public space here almost sort of doesn't exist. It exists in the case of things like a temple or a school, and yet true public space that is in the margin is completely uncared for. Anywhere and everywhere is a trash pit. There is no sharing of the responsibility of that particular kind of. So, and I think it's related. So, that's as far as I can go. Yeah.
So were these experiments with men only?
They were.
Do you think that you can apply this to women, and even in this context, or do you think that levels of sharing might be, or levels of cooperation might be totally different for women?
Yeah. In this society, the roles of women and men are very different, and they're very constrained. They almost are. It's almost like two different universes which overlap in the house. And that said, I would expect some aspect of this to still hold relative to how people relate to people of different castes. Very much. I think that that's strong. I think that would go across gender boundaries. Certainly, in my experience, women there talk as much about caste identity as men do. The reason that I did it with men only here, there are two reasons. One is that their domain is the field, and so that was easy. And then secondly, of course, it was just another variable that I could not have to deal with if I only sampled men. But I think some of it would hold. But I would be really interested in the differences and the places where it didn't. But that's all, women are engaged in a whole different set of institutions to a larger extent. So I bet there'd be some really interesting differences, but I don't know what they are.
Is there intermarriage? So I know one common thing is that women can marry up, but men are kind of stuck where they are.
Yeah.
So is that true for the middle caste here? And do you think, I mean, you might even expect your effects to be stronger for women because they might have less of the specific caste identity, at least in the middle.
Yeah. Or rather they're inclined, you know, to particularly pay attention to which direction to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to know. But in terms of how marriage works, in the survey I asked a decent amount about marriage because I was interested in just how people interact with people of different castes, and so I asked a whole bunch of questions about, you know, how would you interact with someone of this caste, and just go through all of them in the village. And you know, I mean, the marry up thing is, I imagine it's real, but it's not certainly very common, or at the very least, it's not something that people would like to talk about. So high castes will say, I won't allow my people to marry low caste, and low caste will say, I won't allow my people to marry them either. In part because, you know, it's about identity. It's about, you know, this is us, and that's them, and so you know, some of that, they're really strongly endogamous. Yeah.
Did you get demographic data to actually see whether what they're saying is going to match what actually happens?
In terms of marriage, yeah. Yes.
So, one way of thinking about these ethnic categories is as that this is an institutionalized system of dominance, right? That people have society stratified, people have relative amounts of power allocated to them by forces that are much greater than their own social networks. And that power shapes many aspects of their lives. That's consistent with the way that you frame things in terms of hierarchy. Other people, psychologists and anthropologists looking at South Asia, have emphasized the purity contamination dimension in terms of the rationale for why there is stratification, right? And I'm curious whether, again, thinking in terms of how much your results would generalize, whether basically that's irrelevant, right? That that the idioms in which people talk about the justification for the stratification of society are just idioms, really, in the sense that they might affect the details of interaction in terms of, you know, what ritual you perform. But it doesn't actually matter in terms of the kind of core elements of something like, you know, the key features of psychology in people's interactions in cooperative dilemmas or something like that. And it doesn't matter whether, you know, dominance hierarchies are arranged on the basis of purity and inclusion or on the basis of anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you framed it as if it didn't matter, and I'm
Yep.
curious whether you would, you know, sort of endorse
Yep.
that explicitly.
Yep, I do. You know, I mean, I ask people a lot about, you know, well, you know, again, you know, I get to play, you know, you know, it's so great to be able to play the like ultra naive, you know, guy and just ask, you know, questions that, you know, would be very uncool to ask unless you were some, you know, Martian, but I'm a Martian, and so I get to ask really crazy questions, and, you know, you know, the purity stuff comes up. I mean, that's, you know, that's a strong reason. That's why they're different, and so I have no question that it's a very real, that's a very real sort of force. It's a belief that's very common, it's very strong, and I'm sure that it influences behavior in particular ways, but I agree with you. I don't think that the actual power relationships are due to these cultural notions of purity and contamination. I really don't. I think that they co-evolve, but I think that for the most part, the power relationships are explained in that way. But you could just, I can imagine, another situation in which there is another way to justify and explain it that is equally, popular and successful, and yet the power relationships stay there.
So I was wondering about the relative contributions of your different control variables
Yeah.
to the results. So can you just
Sure. So maybe I should. Is that a technical question? I realize we're getting close to the end of our time. Maybe some people want to go. Should I ask that? Because I have three different sort of analyses that go into it. So I'll address that in particular. Any other sort of general questions for everyone? Thank you very much, guys.